Welcome to the Humble Hoof podcast. My name is Alicia Harlov. This is a podcast for both horse owners and hoof care professionals, offering discussions into various philosophies on the health of the hoof and soundness of your horse. Please check us out on Facebook or at thehumblehoof.com. On October 3rd through 6th, 2024 in Chicago, Illinois, we are having the Progressive Hoof Care Practitioners Conference. This only happens every other year, and we have gathered some incredible speakers and presenters to talk to horse owners and hoof care providers about some awesome topics in relation to hoof health and soundness. Those speakers are going to be Dr. David Rendell, who is an incredible veterinarian who's done some amazing research on metabolic issues in the last few years, and he's going to be talking about obesity and metabolic disease and laminitis. Dr. Jenny Hagen is coming from Europe, and she has some really interesting research on biomechanics and the movement of the horse and how it affects hoof wear patterns and how we can read the hoof to know how that horse is moving and how to adjust our trim and approach to their feet because of that. Wendy Murdoch is going to be talking about keeping ourselves healthy as hoof care providers. And Ida Hammer will also be looking at hoof rehab and how preventing issues is so much easier than rehabbing hoof. And Celeste Lazaris is also coming out, and she'll be talking about how the development of a horse's body can impact its hoof growth, and also how the nervous system and myofascial connection lines can actually affect their feet. So we have some amazing speakers, amazing topics that we're going to be discussing. We're going to be having small breakout sessions. We're going to be having a coffee and coffin bones session. We're going to be looking at some bones from the distal limb and the hoof and chat about them. And you'll get to see some great vendors. I'll be there with a table. You can come chat with me and hang out. I hope to see you there. So you can register at progressivehoofcare.org/conference. And I hope to see you there.
Trying to choose the right supplements for the right horses often feels like a chore, and you have enough chores as it is. Fortunately, there's Equithrive, whose mission is to make this whole nutrition equation easier on you and much more beneficial to your horses. Equithrive's lineup of pelleted supplements are developed with care, backed by science, and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Not to mention picky eater approved. Whether you need advanced joint care for your equine athlete, gut, or metabolic support, Equithrive is your one-stop shop for feed tub fortification. Do your horses and yourself a favor and visit equithrive.com. Use the promo code HumbleHoof and get 20% off your first order, plus free and fast shipping nationwide. Don't forget to use HumbleHoof, all one word, to get 20% off your first order at equithrive.com.
A special thank you to our wonderful sponsor, Cavallo. For our Humble Hoof listeners, they are offering 20% off their Cavallo Trek hoof boots using the coupon code HRN at checkout. The Trek is the world's most popular and versatile hoof boot and Cavallo's toughest trail boot, while also doubling as an option for therapy or rehab. The front closure system makes it easily adaptable to various hoof shapes, and TPU upper design allows for maximum strength while minimizing weight for the comfort and ease of movement for your horse. These are recommended by vets and trainers and also loved as transport boots by barrel racers, show jumpers, dressage riders, and everyone in between. Again, for 20% off a pair of Treks, use the code HRN at checkout at cavallo-inc.com. I think I first heard of Jec Ballou, who has been on the podcast before, from her book 101 Dressage Exercises for Horse and Rider. And when I started getting into hoof rehab and seeing how much the body affected the feet, I looked into and purchased and used her book, 55 Corrective Exercises for Horses. So when Jec came out with a new book, the 33 Strength and Fitness Workouts for Horses, I was psyched that she agreed to chat with me about gaining fitness in our equine athletes. So yeah, why don't we start? And obviously, I know you've been on the podcast before, but why don't you kind of remind us a little bit about, some of the things that you work with in terms of rehab for horses?
My main area of focus right now is creating semi and full custom fitness plans for horses. And that obviously is a wide gamut, but it is generally the recreational rider who's grappling with some sort of gait dysfunction and or just lack of performance, which often stems from something fitness related. So that's my main focus right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I kind of see that from both ends of like, if horses are not moving correctly, then they can end up with lameness and then I see them. Or if horses are coming off of a time of lameness and they're trying to go back into work, people are trying to prevent their horse from having issues again. So I think that that's super important and really something that I wish I knew more about. And I'm always trying to learn more about, but I feel like you have to kind of devote your life to really diving into that to get a good grasp on it.
Yes. Yeah. We're all just trying to learn as much as we can, I think.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, I guess a kind of basic question for owners is, what are they looking for when they're working with their horses, or what should they be feeling, kind of noticing to know that something like their horse might need to change how they're working?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is things that we maybe have normalized in working with horses, things like overt resistance or what people call just laziness or, unwillingness to go forward. Some of these, what we might consider like personality traits, I'm putting air quotes around that,
Yeah.
in reality is usually a sign that things ain't working. And it might be a bit of whack-a-mole to figure out why they're not working. Could be the feet, could be they're a ball of stress from how they're housed and kept. Could be tack. There's so many things it could be. Sometimes it's all of them. But basically, the body's not feeling good somewhere. So those are the first things that come to mind. But another common thing I see is like what I call vague lamenesses, like these lamenesses that sort of move around, hard to pinpoint. They've had the vet out 3 times and they have really done an extensive examination of the horse and they can find nothing. A lot of times in my world, that's just a case of a horse that needs to be put in balance and fitness improved because fitness is protective. Generally, if there's something pretty wrong, a vet's going to find it. Something torn, strained, swollen, broken, God forbid. The vet's going to they're going to find these stuff. So if they've had the vet out and I hear from so many of these types of owners that they can't find what's going on, but the horse is definitely not right. You can watch it trot and go, oh yeah, that's not right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that something that I'm trying to learn more about is looking at the horse's muscling in terms of top line or where we see like tension. And it's something that I'm still learning about. But I feel like there's a lot of horses that I come to and people want to obviously get their feet more comfortable. And that's going to play a huge role in how they're moving. But a lot of times I can see dysfunction just in the way their body has kind of over-muscled or under-muscled certain areas. And I'm not at that point where I can be like, okay, I'm going to make a ruling on this and tell you what to do, other than trying to get their feet as comfortable as possible. But is that something that you look at or something that you consider too?
Yeah, it is. And honestly, I think, things are breed specific. There's a certain morphology that different types of horses are going to have, but there are general guidelines. And, anytime there's lumpiness to the muscles or indentations between muscle groups, especially like the hamstring muscle group, things like that, those are usually red flags. Any lack of smoothness of muscling in the neck is always problematic. You see little dents or little unevenness. Like good muscling should be smooth, and that is not dependent on breed. So even some of the, bulkier kinds of breeds, like a quarter horse is going to have just naturally larger muscles than a hot-blooded horse like an Arabian. However, they shouldn't be, when I say lumpy, I mean like standing up, raised up, that's tension, or huge in comparison to the neighboring muscle group. Things should be smooth no matter what sport the horse is doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And so in terms of, if these horses are having issues with their fitness, something that I always worry about is harming a horse through riding. And so we want to start. I know that you're kind of the reason that we were kind of talking today is some groundwork ideas for getting these horses to sort of get back to fitness. So where can an owner start if they want to get their horse more balanced and fit for kind of bringing them up riding?
So there are some general parameters that I try to help people reach if they're working a horse on the ground, because groundwork in recent years has gotten more popular, which is wonderful. At the same time, there's not a lot of prescription there's all different kinds of groundwork, right? Like people do groundwork to help young horses learn manners, and people do groundwork to resolve horses that have real problems. And there's also what I call fitness-based groundwork, which is simply moves that you are doing with your horse for the purpose of either creating and or maintaining at least some level of baseline fitness. And the fitness that we would be talking about is the low level of fitness. This is not obviously the fitness you're going to want to go like do a steeplechase course or something. But I mean, if we draw a parallel with humans, it would be like the fitness that's needed to have a very high quality of living and thriving. And the systems in a horse, and I know with you, I'm preaching to the choir, so this is definitely more for your audience, but the systems in the horse that are dependent on there being a good level of fitness, they're so numerous. I mean, hoof growth is just one, but digestion, immunity, clearing gunk out of the lungs, good respiratory health is dependent on movement, daily consistent movement. Circulating the lymph around the body is dependent on muscular contractions. So just the well-being, gut motility, the well-being of a horse is dependent on it having at least some level of fitness. Now, when horses have had to go through a period of being sedentary for whatever reason, for injury, they're at risk for all of these things, sometimes one at a time failing, or sometimes all at the same time. You get the horse at colics and then they get laminitis, and it's just this ball of awfulness.
Yeah.
So the groundwork that we're talking about is designed to meet the parameters that help kind of tick the boxes on like the minimal dose that a horse needs to maintain or develop back a low level of fitness. So that being 25 or more minutes of continuous, that's an important piece here, movement, ideally with the heart rate somewhere around 80 to 90 beats a minute. It's very, very low, but it is a number that the studies we have at this point indicate you're getting some metabolic changes, adaptations. Any lower than that, and it's basically kind of still in the resting zone. So for most horses, this is a brisk walk, maybe some interspersed little jog steps. And so I have a new book that came out. It's called 33 Strength and Fitness Workouts for Horses. So in the book, I've written some structured groundwork routines, because I find what happens with groundwork is sometimes, I'm not picking on anybody, I myself am guilty of this too. You get your horse out and maybe you have some exercises that you enjoy doing. You think your horse likes them, you like them, and maybe they brings out the play curiosity in your horse, which is always a good thing. But that doesn't mean they're always deriving physiological benefits from that, right? Because what we know about fitness is there does need to be novelty, unfortunately. Like you can't just always do the same things. There's just diminishing returns. Horses very efficient. They adapt to things very quickly. The downside of that is you stop making fitness gains. So a good groundwork fitness routine, again, depends on the horse. Like if a horse is just starting back after a long time of stall rest, God forbid, you would modify this figure, but generally 25 or more minutes, whatever be appropriate for your horse, of rhythmic, continuous movement. So not like maybe walking over some logs and then pausing and chatting with your pals for a few bits. Because again, you just have diminishing returns.
Mm-hmm.
So low impact things are terrific. It's how you sort of stitch them together. So for example, you could bring a horse out, walk them briskly on straight lines and gentle turns for 10 minutes. So you sort of get the joint fluids doing what they need to do to protect the joints. And then you can walk them over some poles on the ground and do that again, whatever's appropriate for your horse. But a good rule of thumb would be about 15 times across the ground poles. And then you might segue immediately into a series of backing up and coming forward again and backing up and coming forward. Maybe you do a total of 30 steps backwards, walking backwards. And then you might segue into a couple of turns on the forehands. And before you know it, you're at 20, 25 minutes. And the exercises you have done have been targeted the horse's postural muscles and trying to keep them moving sufficiently to meet that kind of low heart rate zone. So that's just one quick example. And again, we're not using groundwork here to teach the horse new skills like shoulder in or Spanish walk, because that is also a type of groundwork. What we're trying to do is keep things really simple so the horse is not, stressed out and anxious. These are very achievable bouts of stimulus with the goal being, like I say, just maintaining baseline fitness. It's like the equivalent of you going for a power walk and maybe doing some simple calisthenics. Could you do more than that? I mean, sure, if that was appropriate for you, but baseline, could you just do that? That would be great for most folks, right? So it's a parallel with horses.
Yeah, that makes sense. And honestly, I mean, I'm still learning more and more about groundwork. It's something that I just hadn't done a lot growing up, sadly, unfortunately. And so I absolutely will be looking into your book. And is it something where, I guess this sounds so horrible, but can you do these wrong? Like, I always worry, I open up a book and I pick out an exercise. Am I going to screw up my horse because I'm not doing it? Like, I'm not seeing that my horse is compensating in some way.
It's a very worthwhile exercise. And for that reason, I think that's why people need to embrace the simplicity of these movements that do exist. Like, and many of us know it. You're like, okay, well, my vet or my chiropractor has told me to, for example, maybe use a shallow, very shallow slope or hillside, not steep, very gentle hillside. But again, how do you make a prescription around that? Like, how much time should I spend on that hillside? Like, because you could do that wrong. You could totally overdo it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's some of what I spell out in the book. Can you do it in the wrong posture for your horse? Yeah, if the horse gets super excited, nervous, this is a new thing for them, they're not comfortable, then it's totally counterproductive. So that's why I say it's best to just embrace the simple things like backing up, ground pulls, turns on the forehands. These are pretty difficult to screw up. And there's a low barrier of entry. Like for novice horse people, and I meet so many novice folks who buy a horse and something goes terribly wrong, right? The horse becomes lame, or all of a sudden they've got some problem. They can't ride the horse. And so for that reason, again, there are way more complicated things that you could do that might benefit their fitness, but there's such value in simple routines, turns on haunches, turns on forehands, but not drilling them ad nauseum, making a nice palette of a productive routine. So no, the ones I recommend, it's kind of hard to mess them up because they are not things like shoulder in or haunches in or things that require a lot of bending, which is where you could get into situations where you're getting the horse more twisted up than finding balance and finding straightness. And we really want to avoid that until the horse has fitness. We don't want to get them twisted up in the fitting journey, right?
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. So are there certain guidelines or landmarks of when you can do more or look to do more?
Yeah. I mean, for me, especially with horses that have like these gait anomalies, I always tell people when you can string together 3 weeks of, you're doing your groundwork consistently 4 or more days a week, and you can string together 3 weeks of the horse really being pretty consistent. So consistent in terms of his mental engagement with what you're doing, with the energy, and most importantly, with the soundness, then they're ready to start some rehab riding. And obviously we'd be starting at the walk there and starting your rehab activities under saddle. But that's a good general rule of thumb. Now, for some people, they don't want to move on, they might, or it could just be the heart of winter, right? And you're not realistically going to have a consistent riding program if you're in a snowy place. So maybe you want to just stick with groundwork exercises, and that's totally can be productive. And the point that I always make is you just can't keep doing the same things. You know what I mean? So if you have 3-4 months where you're only going to do groundwork, you can't just do the same things. Again, only because the body adapts so quickly. And then the horse isn't recruiting as many muscle fibers, as well as generally not being as mentally engaged. So you not only get diminishing returns, but you are more likely to get what we just discussed is kind of more a poor form, poor balance. And for that reason, I do get asked the question a lot about lunging, like, is lunging an evil? And I mean, it's a yes and no situation. Like, no horse should be made to go in circles like ad nauseum, right? But for a variety of reasons. But lunging, like in an isolated instance, it's not terrible. But let me put the caveat: I'm talking about with no side reins or restrictive gear when I say lunging.
Right.
But if you're one of these barns where I think you have these back east where the snow slides off the rooftops.
Yes,
I remember that growing up in New England. Whew, those were tense moments. Anyway, so there'd be like these periods of a few weeks where you might spend a lot of time lunging. There are ways to break that up. And so instead of just like, I have 20 minutes, I'm going to lunge my horse for 20 minutes. I really try to find ways to break up that circling. Maybe you lunge your horse for a minute or two. And I really use a watch very frequently when I work with horses. I find that our own assessment of time is not as accurate as we think. So then you set yourself up for, repetitive movement, strain, and or just boredom. So again, you might like lunge for a minute or two and then bring the horse back down to a walk. And maybe you walk a couple of straight lines, or you do some closer in work where you're standing close to the horse's head and you're asking them to make a serpentine with their body. Maybe you throw in some backing up steps, and then you might resume your lunge circle for another minute or two. And then you pause and you maybe walk over some ground pulls. And then, so see, breaking it up like that really alters the ground reaction forces that are so negative with lunging. And it doesn't allow them to build up and have such a negative impact on the horse. So, be creative, think outside the box of this very strict method of lunging, or horses, you're not supposed to deviate from where your feet are standing and the horse makes a perfect circle around you, because it's not that great for their bodies.
Yeah. And that's something that, in the hoof care world, we talk about ground reaction forces a lot and how that can be really hard on their tendons and ligaments. And a lot of times we're, wanting to do our best with the feet so that we're mitigating the effect that those ground reaction forces have on the soft tissue in the joints. So I like that you mentioned that too, because I know that at least in my area, like you said, on the East Coast, or at least in New England, lunging is a huge thing. That's like, that's how all the horses are are kind of legged up a bit. It's just where they start. So, I have your book, The 55 Corrective Exercises, which is amazing. And so I'm wondering, for this new book, like, how does that fall into the fitness program with the corrective exercises book? Or is this not looking to correct anything? It's more just building up fitness.
This is building up fitness.
Okay.
Yeah. The book that you're having, and I'm glad that you find it so useful. It is really geared to be a toolbox for people to find specific exercises that really help address whatever kind of postural thing they have going on with their horse, which can change week to week. My horses, sometimes I'll feel like, God, I feel like I need to, do X, Y, Z, and I'll do one of the corrective exercises for a few days in a row and then, move on to something else. The new book is their complete workouts. They're not standalone exercises. And so, like I say, in addition to the groundwork routines, which I think is going to be really useful for people, especially the demographic you mentioned, is people who have been through a rehab program. Maybe that's a hoof rehab program. And now they want to start building the horse back up, but we don't want to like re-break the horse, right?
Yeah.
I hear that all the time. It's like, well, I don't want to break my horse again. It's like, kudos to you, right?
Yeah.
So it just gives them some guardrails. And the other thing that I get into is, I touched on it a second ago, but using hills. And I do these in hand as well as riding. Again, depends on the horse, what's appropriate for the horse. But the thing, I'm on this mission to really get much clearer prescriptions in the industry on using hills, because we've all grown up hearing that, oh, hills are really beneficial. You should ride your horse on hills if they are weak in the hind end, or if they have whatever problem, you should ride them on hills. Nobody tells you how steep the hill should be, how long you should be on the hill. Should you trot the hill? Should you walk? Should you canter the hill? It's really like the Wild West. And I even still hear this from vets. And to their credit, probably not a lot of them have time to like really look into the mechanics on the hill and the different, as you mentioned, ground reaction forces and all of this stuff that comes up on hills. So, or considering the psychology of their clients. Because if you tell me to go do something, I'm going to do it like 100 times. If 100 times is good, I'm going to do it 1,000 times. Like I'm just an overdoer. And when it comes to hills, that's not good. And with hill stimulus, for the population we're talking about, especially if you're rehabbing, you'd be surprised how little you need. What matters is that it's purposeful and it's consistently applied. So when you start working with hills, you would, choose a slope that allows you to work on it, ideally twice a week. And you would stick with that for, 3-4 weeks. That's what matters is the consistent, but it's not a lot of dosage. Most of the workouts in my book are the actual workout, not the warm up and cool down, is 10 minutes. And that is a good amount of stimulus for most horses if it's purposeful. But I really get into what's a mild slope? Like, what does that look like? What's the definition? What's a moderate slope? And what's a steep slope? And what is the purpose of each? And what kinds of activities should you be doing on them? Because for rehabbing, you don't need a steep slope. I have all these people from the Midwest. They're like, oh my God, I don't have hills. What am I going to do? And I'll tell them, do you have like a gentle rise in your driveway? Do you have a drainage and irrigation ditch, something like that? Because that's really all you need. You don't want to be on a steep hill if you're in a rehab situation. You want a very, very gentle hill that just sort of causes the horse to need to organize their body, like a teeter-totter that doesn't go super high in the air, right? You want to start with like a really low to the ground teeter-totter, and you want to play around with all kinds of exercises on that hill, like circles and curved lines and serpentines and transitions, and not just trudging up and down the hill, which is how many of us approach things until we start thinking outside the box.
Yeah, that's great. And honestly, it makes me feel a little bit better as you're talking, because my entire property is a hill and it's hard to find an actual flat spot. But there's at least like mild hills and then very steep hills. So I have a whole bunch of options. Awesome. I mean, so I actually just was doing like a quick Google for your latest book. And where's the best place to purchase it?
If people buy it on my website, I'll sign it for them. That's jecballou.com. But it's also available on Amazon and my publisher, Horse and Rider Books.
Okay, awesome. That's great. Yeah. Okay. So is there anything that I didn't ask that you think that would be really important to include? Because I feel like I don't know what I don't know. You know what I mean?
Well, I think the last thing, and I think the main point I've been making over the last few months is after horses, just because we have talked about this demographic of horse owners who might be rehabbing their horse. So let's stick with that theme for a bit. The thing to remember, it's funny because I was just talking to my farrier about this today. The thing to remember is that rehab does not and should not last forever. And so what I find sometimes is people are still sort of 5 years down the road treating their horse in the same manner that they might have been when the horse was actively working through its whatever its ailment or injury was. And what I need them all to just take a collective big breath in and repeat after me that fitness is protective. So after you've gone through a period of like treatment and therapies and rehab, then it's time to really start getting fit and to push things. And I find that that's where sometimes people are apprehensive. And I understand that this is harder to do with your own horse. It's easier to do with somebody else's. You don't want to re-break the horse. That's always in the back of your head. Are things going to fall apart? Are the wheels going to come off again? But the important thing to remember is you've done your homework. You did your rehab. And what is necessary with fitness is that horses do need to work hard periodically. And so for a horse that's being ridden regularly, let's say you're riding 3-4 days a week during your prime riding season right now, what that means is at least every week to 10 days, they need a pretty hard bout of exercise. That might be a strong gallop for a little bit, maybe going down the trail and, they really move out at a brisk pace and maybe climb some steep hills around where you are and they get that stimulus. If it's a horse that works only in the arena, it becomes a lot more incumbent on us as their riders to make sure they get that hard stimulus, because most arena horses are not working in the heart rate zone and even with the muscular output to qualify as hard. It's a relatively easy, not, from a coordination standpoint, it's not easy to do something like dressage, but from the physiological standpoint, it's pretty low on the intensity level. So it becomes imperative to, find those hills or find a place to gallop or ways to deliver hard stimulus. And again, that's part of why I wrote the book. It gives people some ideas and timelines for delivering those dosages. Because what happens otherwise, and I don't remember if you and I covered this before, but what happens otherwise is humans are the same. They start to detrain, even horses being ridden consistently or driven consistently after their body gets adapted to doing that set of tasks that you tend to do on your regular riding basis. They, as I mentioned, recruit fewer muscle fibers to get the job done. And so there's like an erosion of fitness that happens. The same with humans. So what we need to do is interject novel stimulus as well as really hard efforts. And one of the value of hard efforts is it improves the neuromuscular connections. So I think of it as like really sharpening the signals between the nervous system and the muscles that they are firing to, and you get better muscle firing patterns. So even with a horse that's pretty fit, you can have delayed muscle firing patterns. You can have that tension that we were talking about earlier that alters the muscle firing patterns. Hard stimulus, strategically applied, is a way to really keep things sharp, firing really sharply. And it improves the blood and oxygen delivery to the muscles, those bouts of hard stimulus. And as we all know, for supple muscles, we need them highly oxygenated and nicely full of blood flushing in and out and not stagnating and not getting choked off.
Okay. Yeah, that's great to know, because I'm always worried that, if you do more than you usually do, are you going to injure the horse?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the place most people go wrong is, again, they think more's better. So it's like, oh, Jec said hard work was good, and they do 4 days in a row. That's not that might break your horse.
Yeah.
But if a horse is in a fitness program, like if they've been ridden consistently, then every 7 to 10 days, you want to make sure they get a hard dose of exercise. And like I say, that kind of the physiology is spelled out a bit more in the book. But that's one thing I would like to leave listeners with, is to trust that process, because it is what keeps the body strong, especially with our domesticated horses. As you know, I mean, horses that live out on 40-acre pastures in a big active herd, not a geriatric herd, they get these hard bouts kind of naturally on their own. The whole herd might start moving or get startled or get excited and have a good strong gallop, and they get those hard doses. But with our domesticated horses who don't have the acreage or those big herds to move in, they're not getting that level of stimulus that they need.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I think I've asked you this before, but do you typically, or would you like travel for a clinic? I've been looking at hosting some next year, and the first year having the farm was just, I couldn't even think about hosting anything, but now I'm actually looking to pin some things down. So is that something that you would do and have you done?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I go all over. It's like back to normal now post COVID.
Yeah.
I got to stay home during COVID, but I go all over. God, this year I've been to Ohio and Louisville and Texas. But I don't know where in Massachusetts you are, but that would be very doable because my dad still lives in Vermont. So
we're on the New Hampshire border.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm always looking for reasons to come back and visit him. So I could easily schedule you for a clinic, and I would just time it to visit him as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I mean, I could have it so that, we had some truck-ins or worked on looked at horses here or whatever. I think that it would be super beneficial. I mean, even just in a selfish way of learning myself. But yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to see that place that you've built. It looks like you poured so much work into it on your Facebook. I'd love to see what you got going on there.
Yeah. It's been a lot of work, and there's so much more to be done, but at least it's, we're trucking along. It's coming along. So that's good.
Well, I admire the effort. So keep up the good work.
Thanks. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you talking with me so much. And I think that this is so important and something that I really need to crack down. And I'm going to order your book, and I really appreciate that you talk to me about this and get the word out.
Oh yeah, definitely. I want to follow along their journey. So that would be fun.
Awesome. Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. This was great. And I'm really excited to get the book and see how it is.
Okay. Thank you so much, Alicia. Take care.
Yeah. Have a great rest of your night.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. I always say that I'm slightly more hoof obsessed than the average person, and chances are, if you're listening to a hoof care podcast, you are too. So we should probably be friends. Feel free to find me on Facebook or email me at thehumblehoof@gmail.com.